Hi everyone, here's the review that some of you were waiting for and some of you were dreading. Either way, here goes. We're going to go through each of the terms on your final rights unit word bank, and hopefully that will give you a little bit of footing as we go through our test. Here we go. People. John Locke. John Locke was really the founder of the ideas of democracy. He promoted life, liberty, and property, and he said that if people believes that its government is unjust, then it should overthrow that government. And his ideas were used during the Enlightenment to promote revolution in the US and also in France. Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson took Locke's ideas and created the Declaration of Independence, saying life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness instead. James Madison. James Madison is the father of the Constitution because he saw that the Articles of Confederation weren't working, and he got everybody together in the convention and pushed it through. Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton, a very famous guy right now, was basically the father of the federal bank in the United States, but the main thing is he debated Jefferson on the role of government, and he was on the Federalist side, not the states' rights side. George Washington. George Washington was elected the president of the Constitutional Convention. George Mason. George Mason is the father of the Bill of Rights. He didn't sign the Constitution because he said it didn't spell out the rights that Americans should have. Adam Smith. Adam Smith's book, Wealth of Nations, was published in 1776, and it's basically the Bible for capitalism. Knox Alights. The Knox Alights were a group in West Bengal in India who were communist from Naxal Bari, and they basically went against Indira Gandhi, but she put them down, arrested 20,000 of them. Narendra Modi. This is the current Prime Minister of India and basically the executive of the country. And he's from the BJP party. Rahul Gandhi. Rahul Gandhi is the son of Rajiv, who was assassinated, the grandson of Indira, who was assassinated. He is the head of the INC today and could be the next prime minister, but he's currently running behind Modi in the polls. Norman Borlaug. He was the father of the Green Revolution and created IR8, which was the strain of rice that was able to produce so much food for the world. Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping is the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, and he is very powerful now, almost like an emperor, because the National Party Congress gave him that power for life, basically. Red Guards. The Red Guards were a paramilitary group of just everyday people, students largely, who they were very powerful during the Cultural Revolution in China. Jack Ma. Jack Ma is the founder of Alibaba and one of the richest people in the world today. That shows Chinese capitalism. Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was the president in 1971 who opened China. And he also eventually was impeached, or he would have been impeached. He was involved in the scandal, the Watergate Scandal. The Uyghurs. Uyghurs are a Muslim group of people who are non-Chinese, non-Han Chinese, and they are living in Xinjiang. And now they are being put in re-education camps, and it's a big problem in China. Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping was the paramount ruler, the general secretary, and then he became the ruler of China in 1976 after Zhou Enlai died. Pol Pot. Pol Pot was a dictator in Cambodia, and he was the leader of the Khmer Rouge, a rival for Vietnam, and ruled from 75 to 79, roughly. 76 to 79, sorry. The Hmong. The Hmong people are a minority group in Vietnam and Cambodia, and they were forced to leave because of their perceived cooperation with U.S. forces. Hoa. The Hoa people are the Huaren, the Chinese people who settled in Vietnam and were basically a middle-class minority group, but they were driven out of the country after the Vietnam War because they were perceived as helping the U.S. Boat people. This is the name that's really given to all people who fled Vietnam from 1975 to 1995, but specifically it's the years 1978, 1979, during the Sino-Vietnamese War, basically over Cambodia. Maya Lin. Maya Lin designed the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. John Kerry. A longtime senator, John Kerry, also fought in Vietnam. He was decorated many medals. He was a swift boat captain and was wounded. And he threw away his medals or got rid of his medals because he didn't feel it was just for him to have medals while people were suffering. And he didn't believe in the war. John McCain. John McCain, again, a longtime senator who just passed away. He was a veteran in the war. He was shot down as a Navy pilot, and he was tortured in Hanoi and eventually released. But he was an advocate for reconciliation with Vietnam. Douglas Pete Peterson. Peterson became the first ambassador to Vietnam once relations were normalized in 1995 under President Bill Clinton. Robert Mugabe. Mugabe was a longtime dictator. He is still alive. He's 95 years old. He ruled into his 90s, and in 2017, he finally was forced to give up his power with a gentle coup d'etat. Morgan Tsvangirai. Morgan Tsvangirai was the opposition leader against Robert Mugabe, and he believed he won the election, but the election was rigged, and he was going to run again, most likely, but he died in 2018. Uhuru Kenyatta. The son of Jomo Kenyatta, Uhuru Kenyatta is the current ruler of Kenya, and some people believe that he has kind of tampered with elections to maintain power. Muhammadu Buhari is the current leader of Nigeria, but he was the first Nigerian leader not belonging to the same party, so it's the development of a multi-party state, and he is being challenged by the former vice president. So we'll see if he wins. Atiku Abubakar. Abubakar is the former vice president who is challenging Buhari in Nigeria for the presidency. Joseph Kabila. Joseph Kabila took over for his father, Laurent Kabila. I made a mistake in the video. I'm sorry, saying Joseph Kabila Sr. But Joseph Kabila was the ruler. He gave up his power because of the constitutional limits, but he's still a senator. He still has power, and it seems like he's still kind of messed with the elections. Bono. Bono, the lead singer of U2, was responsible for the Live 8 concerts in South Africa that promoted debt relief for African nations as a humanitarian mission. Places. Philadelphia. Philadelphia was the site of the Constitutional Convention in 1787. Pakistan. Pakistan has continued to be a rival for India, and they're still fighting over Kashmir and Jammu. Jammu and Kashmir, the two provinces that have been contested. West Bengal. West Bengal, remember, was divided from Bangladesh and was the main site of communist development in the Knox Alights. Mexico. Mexico was the location where Norman Borlaug first tested the rice and the Green Revolution. Philippines. The Philippines were also a test site for the Green Revolution. Tibet. Tibet was taken over by China after the Communist Revolution and has tried to get its freedom ever since and its independence, and it's ruled by the Dalai Lama, but he is in exile. He's not really ruling, but that's what they would like, to have an independent country ruled by him. Xinjiang. Xinjiang is a western province of China where the Uyghur people are being held in re-education camps. Hong Kong. Hong Kong is an economic engine and was a colony of the British after the Opium Wars, and was returned to China in 1997. It has been a big part of their economic growth. Taiwan. Taiwan is obviously the home of the nationalist government that went into exile, and now it's a thriving democracy with multi-party system. It's also an economic engine for growth in China and Southeast Asia. Cambodia. Cambodia was involved in the Vietnam War only because North Vietnamese soldiers and Viet Cong, they kept going into Cambodia, and eventually the U.S. bombed Cambodia. It was an incursion into Cambodia, even though Cambodia wasn't in the war. Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was the main ally of Vietnam during the Vietnam War, and there was a rapprochement with the Soviet Union, a détente with the Soviet Union during the 1970s between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Hanoi. Hanoi was the capital of North Vietnam and is still seen as being kind of behind enemy lines to many U.S., even though now our former president, has visited Hanoi. West Africa. West Africa is the site of many blood diamonds being used to promote revolutions, and it's an area where a lot of violence has happened because of the resources and political unrest. Liberia. Liberia is one of the locations where blood diamonds have been harvested. And it was a colony established, basically a country established by former American slaves. South Africa. South Africa developed the Kimberley Process. South Africa has long had a policy of apartheid, but it overcame it in the time of Nelson Mandela, and he became president. Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was ruled by Robert Mugabe for decades, and finally the power has gone to a different party, and there have been fair elections. Kenya. Kenya was a country that gained its independence under Jomo Kenyatta, and now Uhuru Kenyatta is ruling in his father's place, and basically it's not a free country. Nigeria. Nigeria is a place where elections are being held right now, and they are contested, but there is hope that there can be free elections in Nigeria as well. Tunisia. Tunisia gained its freedom in the Arab Spring and had a revolution in its government so that it could be democratic, and the elections will be held in the fall. Central African Republic. The Central African Republic is the site of much terrorism from the Sadeki movement, and this is problematic. As more Muslims have come into the country, there have also been extremists, and so there's fighting between Muslims and Christians. Things. Republic. A republic is a government of the people. It goes back to the people. The power is no longer in the hands of a king. Republic doesn't necessarily mean a democracy, but it has a representative government of some form. Representative democracy. This is a government in which leaders are chosen by other leaders. And so we have in our country a representative democracy because we have an electoral college. We elect electors. The president is also not chosen by the popular vote. The president is chosen by 50 elections in 50 states. Declaration of Independence. This was the document signed on July 4th, 1776. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and they have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. This is what Thomas Jefferson wrote. Unalienable rights. These are rights that cannot be taken away from us. Natural rights. These are the same thing, but it's a way to say that these rights are rights that we are born with. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is Jefferson's and the Declaration of Independence's version of John Locke's things that people should have a right to. Articles of Confederation. This is the first government that the U.S. had during the Revolutionary War and after, and it was not very helpful because it didn't have a strong central government. Founding Fathers. This is the name we give to the group of people who created the Constitution and founded our country in the United States. Constitutional Convention. This was held in 1787 in Philadelphia and developed the Constitution, which had a bicameral legislature and James Madison's plan for compromise. Bicameral legislature. This is a government. A legislature is the group that makes laws, and bicameral means two houses, and so we have the Senate and the House of Representatives in the United States. Great Compromise. This was the compromise between small states and large states, basically saying that the House of Representatives would be chosen through population, and the Senate would be chosen with 2 senators for each state, no matter how big or small. The 3/5 Compromise. The 3/5 Compromise was one more part of that deal that said that all slaves would be counted as 3/5 of a person, even though they couldn't vote. And this was to keep the southern states from not accepting the Constitution because most of their population was slaves. Preamble. The preamble is what walks before. It's the first part of our Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, etc. Checks and balances. This is related to the separation of powers, and it's the idea that each branch of our 3 branches can cancel out or balance the other branches. And so no branch has too much power. Department of Justice. This is a branch of justice that's underneath the executive branch and is called to investigate and is part of the justice system. It's the FBI. And so it's important that we understand that the president must stay out of the Department of Justice's business, especially when that DOJ is investigating the president. Veto. A veto is when the president can cancel a bill that has been passed, and the Congress can override the veto with enough votes, with 2/3 majority. House of Representatives. This is the body of 435 representatives in our country that is elected by population. Senate. Every state in the United States has 2 senators, and they're chosen by popular vote, but there are 2 no matter how big or small the state is. President's Cabinet. The Cabinet is a group of leaders who are in charge of different departments in the U.S. government to be executives for that part of the government under the president. Impeachment. Impeachment is the process started in the House of Representatives and then confirmed in the Senate, and it is impeachment of the president or other officials such as Supreme Court justices or other lawmakers. Supreme Court. This is the highest body of the judicial branch and has 9 justices and a chief justice who runs the show. Federalist Papers. These are the papers that were written by John Jay and Alexander Hamilton and others, and basically they were debates of whether the U.S. government should be federalist or more of a federation where there wasn't a strong central government. Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights ended up being the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. There were originally 12 articles, but the first 2 were not adopted. First Amendment. The First Amendment. This amendment guarantees our rights to RAPS, religion, assembly, press, petition, and speech. Due process. Due process is what is guaranteed through the justice system, that you are not put in prison without a charge, and that you have a right to a trial by a jury of your peers. Cruel and unusual punishment. This is a safeguard against the government punishing people in ways to, or trying to torture them to get information. And so this is a common practice of nations before that time. Wealth of Nations. Wealth of Nations is a book written by Adam Smith, and it's basically the Bible of capitalism. Nationalism. Nationalism is a belief that your country is the most important thing no matter what government you have. Socialism. Socialism is the belief that the government should have part ownership of certain sectors of society, like transportation or banking. Communism. Communism is complete control by the government, usually through one party. Multi-party rule. This is the idea that you can have, it's a multi-party state, and you have elections between different parties to have a conversation about what the government should be. And it's the preferred way for democracy. Unwritten Constitution. This is a group of things that we have as traditions in our country, in the United States. For example, political parties. This is something that is not in the Constitution, but it is a part of our political system. Secularism. This is what India wanted, Nehru wanted in the government, so that religious fighting could be sidelined, and secular means non-religious. 5-year plans. These are the plans in a communist or socialist government where a committee is responsible for carrying out a plan over 5 years and making sure that it happens. IR-8. This is the strain of rice that was eventually developed in the Philippines and then also planted in India and developed a great economy of even exporting rice and provided food for millions of people. Republic of India. In 1950, the Constitution was adopted, and India went from being a part of the Commonwealth to being a republic and not having the monarch anymore. Sansad Bhavan. This is the Parliament building, and it's shaped like a Buddhist symbol, the wheel that was common in Buddhism, and it's got 24 spokes, but also contains an 8 for the Eightfold Path. Rajya Sabha. Rajya Sabha is the upper house in India, kind of like our Senate. Lok Sabha. The Lok Sabha is the lower house. It's like the House of Representatives in the US. President of India. The President of India is responsible for leading the Parliament. Prime Minister of India. The Prime Minister is the true executive in India, and that would be Prime Minister Modi today. Nepotism. Nepotism is the hiring or inclusion of family members in government just because they're family or friends. Universal suffrage. Universal suffrage is voting for all people, including women and all races and religions. Casteism. Casteism is the belief that certain groups, because of their previous lives and karma, that they are higher or lower in society. The Brahmins are the highest and the untouchables are the lowest. Brahmins. This is the highest class, the highest caste in Indian society. Untouchables. This is the lowest caste in Indian society. Scheduled castes. These are the groups that are designated for representation in government no matter what, and it's basically a quota or a proportion that must be given to different groups, and this is a way that the government tried to get rid of that casteism. Sikhism. The Sikhs are a group that are not Hindus, but they are very important in India, and they have different religious beliefs. And so sometimes there's fighting between those groups. Bollywood. Bollywood is India's Hollywood. Indian National Congress. This is the party of the Gandhis and has been the traditional party of India. It was a single party that when only one party was running the country, and now there are other parties. Bharatiya Janata Party. This is the party of Prime Minister Modi and is the opposition party to the INC and has taken power now. Third Front. The Third Front is outside of those two parties, the Indian National Congress and the BJP. GDP. This is gross domestic product. This is how much money a country produces in a year. Chandrayaan-1. Chandrayaan-1 is the lunar probe launched by India. Confucianism. This is the policy of respecting your elders and your government. It's a religious belief in China that has also guided government to revere leaders. Multi-party state. A multi-party state is the ability for more than one party to rule the country. 1984. This is the book by George Orwell, which talked about Big Brother controlling everybody in the country. And it's a dystopian, futuristic novel, even though 1984 has passed, and it reminds us of the abuses of government and brainwashing. National Party Congress. This is the Chinese communist way of getting everyone together. 2,000 people join every 5 years. Central Committee. This is a group of 200 people that meet much more frequently and are the main leaders in the country in communist China. Politburo. This is a group of 20 leaders from the Central Committee who are in charge of more day-to-day operations. Standing Committee. These are the 6 most elite members of the Politburo and the Central Committee. General Secretary. This is the most important person in the Communist Party and the leader of the country. So General Secretary in China today is Xi Jinping. People's Liberation Army. This is the army, the Communist Army, the Red Army that is compulsory. That means people are supposed to be in the army, but it's actually volunteer. There are plenty of soldiers. Nuclear weapons in China. It's clear that China has hundreds of nuclear weapons and are prepared to use them in defense of their country. Command economy. A command economy is a feature of communism where a committee decides how much of something to produce and decides what jobs people have. It's not driven by the market. Market economy. This goes back to the ideas of Adam Smith and pure capitalism where supply and demand determine prices in a country. Hang Seng Index. This is the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and is a huge indicator of the health of the Chinese economy. Foxconn, also known as Hong Hai. This is a company from Taiwan that built factories in China and produces Apple products and laptops and lots of technology. Alibaba. Alibaba is one of the biggest companies in the world and is run by Jack Ma and has sold more than Walmart and eBay and Amazon combined since 2015. Chang'e 4. Chang'e 4 is a space probe that landed in January of 2019, a lunar probe. Yutu Jade Rabbit rover. This is the rover that goes with Chang'e 4 on the moon. Flying Tigers. The Flying Tigers were a group of American pilots who went to China to train Chinese pilots before the U.S. had entered World War II. WTO. This is the World Trade Organization, which is kind of like the United Nations for trade, and countries can be a part of it, and then they have lower trade barriers, and the goal is to have a free market all over the world. Trade deficit. There is a large trade deficit between China and the United States because Chinese goods are much cheaper and they are coming into the U.S., and our goods are more expensive, and China is not accepting as many of our goods. Illegal immigration. This has been a part of the relationship between China and the United States over the past 20 years. Many illegal immigrants from China tried to smuggle themselves on boats in the 1990s and were in very dangerous conditions. Study abroad. This is a big part of how Chinese students have come to the United States, and Chinese influence has spread around the world. Tiananmen Square. This is the main meeting place in Beijing, in the center of Beijing, in the Forbidden City. Democracy Wall. This is a movement in the late 70s, continued through the 80s, and was promoting democracy by publishing against the government or about what people should do in China. Goddess of Democracy. During the Tiananmen Massacre time in 1989, the Goddess of Democracy was a statue that was erected almost overnight, and it was kind of an echo of the Statue of Liberty and the desire of the Chinese people to have democracy. Rapprochement. Rapprochement is when you have reconciliation or improved relations between countries. Peace with honor. This is a slogan used by President Nixon when he was running for re-election in 1972. His goal was to have peace in Vietnam, but still maintain the honor of the U.S., and not feel like we were completely defeated, but we were. The Vietnam trade embargo. This began in 1975, and it was an embargo on Vietnamese goods, mainly because Vietnam had become totally communist and was seen as aggressive. Re-education camps. These are camps that were used in communist China, but also Vietnam after the Vietnam War, and then today in Xinjiang, it's being used for the Uyghur people to basically force them to accept new ways and brainwash them. Agent Orange. This is the chemical weapon that was used during the Vietnam War to kill plants, but also it affected people, killed people, and led to birth defects. POW MIA. POW is prisoner of war, MIA is missing in action. Together, this is a group of Vietnam War soldiers that were unaccounted for, and finally in the 1990s, some remains were sent back to the U.S., repatriated. Repatriation. Repatriation is the returning of physical remains or when someone goes back to their father country. Genocide. Genocide is when you attempt to kill an entire group of people. This is what Pol Pot did in Cambodia. Khmer Rouge. The Khmer Rouge was a communist group led by Pol Pot in the late 70s and took power. Eventually it was defeated and went into kind of an exile in the jungles. Vietnam Veterans Memorial. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial, designed by Maya Lin, is an inspiration for many veterans who need closure and healing. Normalized relations. Normalized relations happen when countries agree to end their conflict and they agree to have embassies in each other's countries and basically carry on normal relationships. And that happened in 1995 with the US and Vietnam. Apocalypse Now. It was a movie that starred Martin Sheen, and it was about a general who had basically become part of the Vietnam problem, and it just reveals life in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. Blood diamonds. Blood diamonds are harvested in West Africa and also in the Congo, and they are the people who are doing it often cut off arms and legs of people who don't produce enough diamonds and are creating new slavery. Dodd-Frank Act. The Dodd-Frank Act was a part of the post-Great Recession period in the US, trying to regulate businesses and also to keep them from purchasing products that were a part of conflicts in Africa. Kimberley Process. The Kimberley Process is developed in South Africa, and it was designed to make sure that diamonds weren't blood diamonds. Globalization. Globalization is the process of multinational corporations crossing over boundaries to sell their goods and lowering trade barriers. Conflict materials. These are materials, usually raw materials in African countries and other countries, but in the Congo mainly, and one of them is tantalum, but also tungsten, gold, and tin. Tantalum. Tantalum is one of those conflict materials, and it is a source. It helps with technology, and so it's very precious. African Union. The African Union is a loose organization of African nations. It's growing in strength. It was led by Gaddafi at the beginning, but it was also the dream of Kwame Nkrumah. Today, again, they discuss issues that affect all African nations. Peacekeepers. Peacekeepers have been used by the United Nations in Africa to solve conflicts. World Bank. The World Bank is under the United Nations along with the International Monetary Fund. The World Bank seeks to give loans to poor countries so that they can develop their infrastructure and economies. Often it ends up creating a bad situation for the countries that can't pay back their loans. Seleka, I think I may have said that name wrong earlier, but Seleka is in the Central African Republic, and Seleka is a terrorist organization, Muslim extremist terrorist organization from Chad and Sudan. Wahhabism is an extreme form of Islam and is from Saudi Arabia and has been used by many terrorist groups to promote their agenda. Sunnism is mainstream Islam and wants to rule by the law of the Sharia law. Shiaism. The Shiites believe in Shiaism, and it's a different belief system from the Sunnis, even though all of them are Muslims, and so Sunnis and Shiites often fight each other. Islamic State, also known as ISIL or ISIS, this grew out of the Iraq War, out of the uprising against U.S. troops and Al-Qaeda. They basically worked together, and the Islamic State wanted to found a state in Syria and Iraq. Events. Great Compromise. This was because of James Madison at the Constitutional Convention. The Great Compromise created the Senate and the House of Representatives in their current form. Constitutional Convention of 1787. This is the convention in Philadelphia where the Great Compromise was carried out and the new Constitution was created. Marbury versus Madison. This is a Supreme Court decision whereby the Supreme Court was given more power to declare whether legislation was constitutional or not. So because of this, it gave power to the Supreme Court. Operation Steeplechase. In 1971, Indira Gandhi sent troops into West Bengal and arrested 20,000 Knox Alights. Green Revolution. This is the movement led by Norman Borlaug to develop genetically modified organisms, new kinds of rice so that people could have food. Chinese embassy bombing. During the Kosovo conflict in 1998-1999, the U.S. launched cruise missiles and it hit the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, and as a result, Chinese anti-American sentiment rose and increased. 1984 LA Olympics. During these Olympics, the Chinese made their first appearance since before communism had taken over. And so it was the world discovering the abilities of these Chinese athletes and the development of China. May 4th movement. The May 4th movement happened in 1919, May 4th, after the Versailles Conference had basically given part of China to Japan. Students in China went to Tiananmen Square and they protested. Democracy Wall movement. This again is about the Democracy Wall in the late 70s, early 80s, and people were able to publish against the government even though communism was such a strict form of government. Tiananmen Massacre, 1989. This massacre, after student protests for months, tanks were sent into Tiananmen Square and killed thousands of people. Sino-Vietnamese War. This was a conflict in the late 1970s between China and Vietnam, basically over Cambodia, and Vietnam had invaded Cambodia. Paris Peace Accords of 1973. This is the end of the Vietnam War. On paper, it continued through 1975 because North Vietnam wasn't going to stop and it conquered all of Vietnam. Boat People Crisis. The boat people crisis in the late 70s was because people had to flee Vietnam, the Hmong, the Hoa people, and thousands of people got into rickety boats and many died on the way. They relocated to Hong Kong, Malaysia, different camps that were established for refugees, and many were eventually resettled in Canada and Australia and in the US. Watergate Scandal. The Watergate Scandal involving President Nixon involved a break-in of the Democratic National Committee's office at the Watergate Hotel, and it led to the downfall of Richard Nixon. US election of 1972. This election was tainted because of Nixon's involvement in the break-in at the Watergate Hotel, and it was a landslide victory for Nixon, so he didn't even need to do that. Fall of Saigon. In 1975, Saigon fell to the communist forces of North Vietnam, and Vietnam became all of it became communist. Nigerian cattle conflict. This is a conflict between farmers and herders in Nigeria, and they are often, again, it's a conflict between Muslims and Christians as well. And many people have been killed through this conflict. 9/11. 9/11 is the attack on the World Trade Center because of Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden on September 11th, 2001. Dissolution of the Soviet Union. Dissolution means falling apart. The Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, and as a result, basically, Russia became a democracy, and that didn't last. It's a very tainted democracy today, but that was a turning point in world history. Thanks for watching.